Since the victory of Iran's Islamic Revolution, relations with the US have been non-existent. In his UN General Assembly speech, US President Barack Obama acknowledged the US has a history of interfering in Iranian affairs and that the path to building trust is a difficult one. Iran says it is open to full relations with all world nations as long as those relations are based on mutual respect and recognition of Iranian rights. Now, is Washington going to change its attitude towards Tehran? Will President Hassan Rouhani's new government usher in a new era of relations with the US? This is the debate.
President, Mr. Secretary General, received from
the U.S. President once again strikes a conciliatory tone in the Iran portion of his speech at the UN General Assembly. In his remarks, Obama said the U.S. respects Iran's rights and is not seeking regime change in the Islamic Republic.
I do believe that if we can resolve the issue of Iran's nuclear program, that can serve as a major step down a long road towards a different relationship, one based on mutual interests and mutual respect. Now, meanwhile, the Supreme Leader has issued a fatwa against the development of nuclear weapons, and President Rouhani has just recently reiterated.
However, he noted that he has no illusions about the relations with Iran as mistrust between the two countries run too deep.
The United States and Iran have been isolated from one another since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. This mistrust has deep roots. I don't believe this difficult history can be overcome overnight. The suspicions run too deep.
Any move by Iran and the U.S. to start a new relationship would be heavily overshadowed by a series of events that began decades ago and have continued to date. In his speech, the U.S. President alluded to the 1953 coup against Iran's then democratically elected government. The coup had been orchestrated by the U.S. and Britain and still lives in infamy as far as the Iranian people are concerned. Following the coup, the U.S. was dominant in all aspects of life in Iran and threw its full support behind the repressive regime of Iran's former monarch. After the downfall of the Shah and the victory of the Islamic Revolution, the U.S. pursued what Iranians view as a hostile policy towards their country. During the Iraqi war against Iran in the 1980s, Washington supported the regime of Saddam Hussein with logistics and intelligence support. Obama himself admitted in his UN speech that Iran was the victim of chemical weapons during the war. Ironically, some chemical weapons were supplied to Saddam by his own country, the United States, as well as several European states. After the war, relations between the two sides did not improve. Iran has repeatedly accused the U.S. of hatching plots against the Islamic Republic. Washington has not taken any practical measures to prove otherwise. It has spearheaded round after round of illegal, unilateral sanctions against Iran, which have caused difficulties for the Iranian people. Iran has frequently said the U.S. must first prove its goodwill if it seeks good relations with Tehran. Iran has shown throughout the past decades that it does not tolerate pressure or foreign meddling in its affairs. In his UN address, Obama once again reiterated U.S. policy to interfere in the Middle East, saying, quote, "Disengagement would be dangerous." Although positive signs have emerged in recent days as to whether the two sides will resolve their differences, it remains to be seen how things will unfold in the next few days.
You're watching The Debate. Joining me live from Tehran is Mr. Fuad Izadi. He is a professor with the University of Tehran. Welcome, Mr. Izadi, to The Debate. I'd also like to welcome our guest in Washington, Mr. Frederick Peterson. He's a Congressional Defense Policy Advisor. Thank you very much for being with us. I'll put my first question to our guest here in Tehran, Mr. Izadi. Now, by saying it clearly, Mr. Izadi, that the US is not seeking regime change and that it respects Iran's right to access peaceful nuclear energy, do you think the US is actually giving the message that it's changing its attitude towards Iran?
Yes, I think what President Obama said today are positive statements. The only problem is that in reality the US government is spending about $100 million on what it calls democracy promotion in Iran, which is basically aimed at regime change. So the rhetoric and the nice statements are welcome news, but we need to see some actual policy changes. He in fact also acknowledged that there is a democracy, a vibrant democracy in Iran, by saying that President Rouhani has a mandate from the Iranian people, basically acknowledging that in Iran we have free and fair elections. And unlike what happened here 4 years ago, in this election, nobody really disputed the results. So what we need to see, hopefully in the near future, is stopping this money to overthrow the government here. He acknowledged the fact that the U.S. government actually was in the business of coup d'etats in this country previously. A lot of people are asking this question, that why repeat the same mistake again at the in the same country. So that's, I think, one thing. On the issue of Iran's nuclear program, he unfortunately said that Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapons program, which is contrary to what the Director of National Intelligence, U.S. Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, said in March at a hearing in U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee. In that hearing, he said that based on the intelligence that the U.S. has, they are not sure if Iranian leaders have decided to make a nuclear weapon.
Yes.
Which means that not only Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon, not only Iran is not in the process of making one, the decision to make one is also not taken. So we have to basically look at President Obama's statements, be happy that he's talking nicely, but we need to see some real policy change.
Okay, let's bring in Mr. Peterson on this as well. Now, Mr. Peterson, the leader's fatwa, we know, is nothing new. Why should, do you think, Obama suddenly acknowledge it now? I mean, do you think they are going to put aside this dual-track approach of pressure we know through sanctions and threats, alongside talks? We hear Mr. Izzadi here saying there that, you know, if you just keep talking about something, it has to be translated into action, of course. Do you think that it will be actually translated into action? Is that dual-track approach going to be stopped?
I think we do have an opportunity for a new beginning. That opportunity is perhaps a narrow window. It is born of a confluence of both immediate opportunity of the UN and an opportunity of a confluence of interests. Those interests, we have a new president on one side, and a president who is seeking to recover from a very recent foreign policy and personal debacle in Syria. And I think President Obama is trying to recover from that and is looking for a win. I think the new president in Tehran is looking to establish himself and for his country to bring economic prosperity to a country that desperately needs it and is laboring under very painful sanctions, and an opportunity to bring a true new peace to that region of the world. Both sides of this equation, in order to capitalize on this, are going to have to carry through with words and promises in hard actions on both sides. Words are not enough. And the coming days and weeks will prove whether there is devotion on both sides of the equation to commitment to action rather than just words.
Yes.
I think President Obama, once again, is trying to distract the world from what recently occurred in Syria and is desperately looking for a win. We do have an opportunity here. I quite concur with the professor, but as the old saying goes, we want to keep our powder dry on this, and we want to just wait until we see how things develop over the next days and weeks.
Yes. Now, Professor Izzadi, the thing is, I guess there is
an opportunity.
Yes. I guess in the United States, just mentioning there, if action is needed on both sides. Now, the thing is, what we're hearing from President Rouhani is basically, at least on the nuclear policies of Iran, what we've been hearing from Iranian governments before him, that the Iranian right to enrichment should be recognized, that we're not going to discuss enrichment, that we're going to have our rights, recognized and respected. So when the United States means action from Iran or confidence building on Iran, how far is Iran, willing to go there? And do you think any kind of an agreement, consequently, can be reached?
I think an agreement can be reached. The only thing is that we have to remember that on one side, the Iranian side, we have a ready government. Not only President Rouhani has a mandate to basically resolve some of these foreign policy issues. We had a speech here by Ayatollah Khamenei, the leader of Islamic revolution, basically talking about flexibility and the fact that sending this message that the new government is going to be able to be flexible on issues that do not cross Iran's red lines. I think that's basically a sign that this part of the deal is ready to be made. We are not sure if the Israeli lobby will allow President Obama to do what is essentially in the interest of U.S. national security, which is reaching a deal with Iran. Unfortunately, in U.S. Congress, we have a strong presence of the Israeli lobby. And in the past many years, actually, we really didn't have major problems with President Obama. The problem Iran had was with the U.S. Congress. And we do not see any signs that the majority in Congress, who are always sanctioning Iran every other week, are actually changing their minds. So I think we need to also have an effort by President Obama to use his influence in internal
Professor
US
Izzat,
politics.
if I could just jump in here, you did mention something rather important there, and I'm going to raise that issue up with our guest in the United States as well. But just before that, let's quickly take a look at some of the comments that have been posted on our Facebook page. Some important questions there as well, and we'll be back.
I believe it's a political game that the US government has started again to deceive public opinions all over the world. This relation couldn't be rebuilt unless the US admits to its crime against Iran. Remember, the US faced a fiasco in Syria, and now they are trying to conceal this fact by a puppet show in the media. Well, it's good to expand mutual understanding and promote global peace and security. However, there must be a little flexibility by the other side to respect each other's rights and duties in this global society. For the relations between Iran and the US, there is an obstacle called Israel. Unfortunately, Israel is unable to bear the progress and prosperity of any Muslim country. Israel would have occupied all Lebanon if there were no Hezbollah. Israel blames Iran for undermining its power in the region.
Some of the comments posted on our Facebook page. I'll go quickly to our guest in the United States, Mr. Peterson. Now, let's just regard the issue of Israel here. We saw that commentator also refer to it. We've been hearing here in Iran, even by the leader of the Islamic revolution, that whenever the nuclear issue was going to reach some kind of a conclusion, it was the United States that blocked that conclusion with various excuses. And a lot of people are saying that that was a result of Israeli pressure. What do you think about the Israeli factor?
Well, in all fairness, I think we should look at Israel's situation. They are a very small country, the size of one of 50 of our small states, surrounded and vastly outnumbered by people who have very hostile interests toward Israel. It would be unusual to have such a country not very concerned about their own survival, and especially in fact, when others, surrounding neighbors, have made existential threats against them. However, I should say that we should be focusing now on the opportunity presented to both presidents on both sides to eschew or to avoid the extremists that are pulling them to the margins and try and find an opportunity here in a relatively short period of time to come together and find their common interests and work toward those interests so that we can have an agreement with which
Mr.
both
Peterson,
sides
sorry for jumping in here. Just
may
a quick
live
question.
in a recognition that peace...
Mr. Peterson, don't you think then that for a first step by the Obama administration, it should consider removing all the pressure from Iran, including sanctions or whatever that requires congressional approval? And as I guess Mr. Izadi was saying, the factor of the Israeli lobby there is actually preventing that.
Well, there is a quid pro quo that goes on with any negotiation. That is, one must give in order to get on both sides. The question is the determination on both sides to reach toward a common goal, and that is peace in the region. To realize what their vital interests are, not sacrifice those vital interests on either side, the legitimate vital interests, but find common ground and work courageously to meet in that common ground with assurance that nations which are suspicious traditionally and have contended with one another in the past must be reassured that whatever they give is reaching toward a good faith gesture on the other side as well. So good faith as well as common interests are vital to be recognized, and it is up for all of us to see in the near future whether both sides will have the audacity and the determination to reach forward into the future together and to do that which may be unpopular with elements within their own respective countries, but reach for a common peace.
Right. Well, Mr. Izadi, we're hearing Iranians saying that they are ready for any kind of deal, negotiations, relations, if there are good intentions involved. Now, the thing is, what do you think about those intentions? I mean, we've got quotes by President Obama in one instance saying that my view is that if you have both a credible threat of force combined with a rigorous diplomatic effort, you can strike a deal. For instance, that's one quote. Or elsewhere, he's even continued to be threatening Iran with military action. We heard on the Syrian situation the references that he made to Iran, saying that we shouldn't embolden it, that even suggesting that if we don't attack Syria, then Iran would think that we're not going to attack it if we need to. So with this kind of language, and now this said in the, New York, do you think that there are good intentions involved?
The problem that we have is that the US president has the audacity to go to a UN General Assembly meeting and then in every other sentence violate the UN Charter, which you gave one example. Based on Chapter 1 of UN Charter, Article 2, not only use of force is illegal under international law, the threat of use of force is also illegal. The only time under UN Charter use of force is allowed is when you are doing self-defense or there is a mandate from UN Security Council. With regard to Iran, UN Security Council has not allowed President Obama to threaten Iran, and US government is certainly not self-defending when it threatens Iran. So unfortunately, the US president likes to just violate the UN Charter right at the UN and do it repeatedly, not only threatening Iran, but as you said, he also said that the US government is going to be present in the Middle East and it's going to use force on its vital national interest, which is, again, an illegal thing. No one under international law is allowed to use force because of its national interest. So until we have this change of mindset, we are not going to really see anything substantial with regard to Iran-US relations. We are always optimistic with regard to the future, and we like to be like that. But In reality, we see on one hand the Israeli lobby is singing the old songs with regard to Iran, and then we have the U.S. president who is under that pressure, saying things that are illegal internationally, and then they expect Iran to basically listen to them, which is not going to happen. It was interesting when President Obama was talking about Iranians being gassed during the Iran-Iraq war. He forgot to mention that Saddam's government was using images from US spy satellites to find where Iranians are and then gas them based on that intelligence that he got from the US satellites. So we have this troubled history. We are not seeing any substantial change of mind in Washington
well, Mr.
yet.
Izzadi, let me stop you there if I may. We are quickly running out of time. Just to get your concluding remarks, both of our guests. Ms. Peterson, would you agree that President Obama is still not in that stage of actually, admitting to all the mistakes that the United States has made about Iran, the chemical issue, the Saddam Hussein issue being one of them? Instead of apologizing, he's actually, not using the proper language here.
Well, what I think is important is not so much going back and beating our breasts about the past, but actually trying to reach for an opportunity through a very narrow window that only may exist now, because we have two presidents and two countries, both with histories of involving themselves in beyond their own borders. Yes. And yet we have an opportunity to reach beyond those interests toward a common peace, and I would say we should focus on that,
yes,
rather
Mr. Peterson,
than trying
sorry to jump in there.
Justify or accuse for a past.
Yes, we are running out of time. Just quick conclusion by Mr. Izzadi. Are you, after all, Mr. Izzadi, optimistic, though, at least for this stage? Quickly, if you can.
Not yet. The speech that President Obama had wasn't really that serious with regard to changing that mindset that we talked about. We are going to have talks between 5+1 and Iran. John Kerry and Javad Zarif will be there. We are hoping that talk will be more fruitful.
Thank you very much, Professor Fuad Izzadi with the University of Tehran, with us there live from Tehran. A big thank you to our guest in Washington as well, Mr. Frederick Peterson, Congressional Defense Policy Advisor. That is the end of this edition of The Debate. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us.